Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome in. My name is Paul. I get to serve as the Connections pastor here at Ransom Church. And as we get started today, I want to remind you that right now in the kind of the church calendar, the church year, we're in a season of Lent, which is this kind of long season that leads all the way up into and kind of culminates with Easter. And speaking of Easter, you can find all the Easter information at ransom.church/Easter. All the information you need is right there. But I want to specifically highlight something that's on there. It's not maybe practical information that you might be looking for, but it's a Lenten devotional, which is a weekly devotional that we've put together that will lead us all the way up to Easter. This is a fantastic resource. And since it's weekly, if you're behind a little bit already, jump in. You can catch up quick. This will be so important to really spiritually prepare ourselves going into Easter together. So I want to encourage you to go to ransom.church/Easter to look into that. And as we're in this Lenten season, we're spending some time looking at a few people, a few characters from the Bible who said yes to God. And so this sermon series we're in is called Here I Am, because these people told God, here I am, God, use me. I'm ready to say yes. And today we're taking a look at a fairly well-known guy from the Bible, a guy named Abraham. You may know him. If not, I want to catch you up to speed. I want to just give you kind of the grand overview of Abraham's story, and then we'll drill in a little bit deeper. But Abraham was actually born with the name Abram. When he was born, his father Terah named him Abram, and he was born in a place called Ur, just Ur. That's where he was from. And Abram went to Ur High School, and he bumped into a girl named Sarai in geometry, and they ended up getting married. I don't know if that's entirely true, but you can't prove me wrong either. So at some point, though, Abram and Sarai and this whole family that kind of lived together moved out of Ur and lived in this place called Haran. And after a while in this place, Terah, Abram's dad, died, which meant that Abram was now the kind of the man of the house. He was in charge of this whole family, including some extended family. And at the age of 75, God told Abram to leave that place they were and to go to a new land. And God promised that if he did that, he would bless Abram and his descendants, and they would become this great nation. So Abram and Sarai and a few others kind of pack up, and they left Haran to keep moving further away from Ur. And they eventually made it to this beautiful place, and they were ready to make this place their home. But sadly, there was a terrible famine. There wasn't enough food, so they had to keep traveling all the way to Egypt just to survive. Now, while they were in Egypt, some questionable stuff went down. Long story short, they got kicked out of Egypt, like the entire country of Egypt. The Bible puts it very nicely, very politically correct. It says Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and they sent Abram out of the country. But let's face it, they got bounced out of Egypt, kicked out of the country, and they slowly had to start making their way back up to that place that they were supposed to call home. Now at this point, Abram is 86 years old and has no kids, which was a big deal for anybody in this time, but an especially big deal for Abram and Sarai. So Sarai kind of cooks up this plan for Abram to have a child with another woman to kind of keep the family line going, which is probably always a bad idea, but was an especially bad idea for them because God definitely did not give that idea the green light. But they go through with it anyway, and now Abram has a son named Ishmael with a servant named Hagar. But because Abram was disobedient with how this went about, Ishmael was not going to carry this blessing of becoming a great nation that God wanted to give Abram's descendants. Fast forward a little bit. Abram is now 99 years old, and God talks to him, and he tells him that I'm going to give you a new name. I'm going to give you and Sarai new names. Now, instead of Abram and Sarai, they'd be called Abraham and Sarah, which, if you've had the same name for 100 years, would be a hard shift to make, but I'm sure they got used to it. But these are special names that God wanted to use to kind of communicate his plan to use them for these amazing things. And quickly, God follows through on these promises by giving Sarah a son named Isaac. Eventually, at the age of 127, Sarah passes away. Abraham, after a while, remarries, has some more kiddos, and eventually he passes away as well. The Bible literally uses the phrase ripe old age. You've probably heard that before. It says Abraham was the ripe old age of 175 years when he died, which is a little overripe if you ask me, but it says he lived a long and satisfying life. Now, obviously, that was an incredibly quick version. There's so much more to their story. There's a lot of amazing little journeys along the way. There's amazing stories and confusing stories and, frankly, just embarrassing stories, little snapshots along the way that really add so much flavor to those 175 years that Abraham lived. And the life of Abraham is particularly unique because of the impact that he has made on the world, even to this day. Anyone who claims Christianity, Judaism, or Islam as their faith right now traces back to Abraham as essentially kind of the father of their tradition, which right now means about 4.5 billion people spiritually trace a lineage to Abraham. In this series, we are taking a closer look at some of the individuals in the Bible who gave God their yes with the purpose of inspiring and challenging us to give God our yes as well. And when you look at the life and the legacy of Abraham, the sheer enormity of the impact that he has made on the world, it's hard for us to even fully comprehend. This one rather unremarkable guy from a place called Ur, who is the spiritual father of our faith, because he gave God his yes. He said, "Here I am. God, I'll do what you ask me." Now, there's not enough time today to look at all the stories of his life or to look at all aspects of who he was as a man, but there are a couple things that are well worth a closer look. So we're going to look at those right now. Genesis 12 is really where the story of Abraham takes off. So we should definitely start there. Genesis 12. If you don't have a Bible, raise your hand. Our ushers would love to bring you one at this point. We're going to be on page 7. It's right towards the front. Genesis 12 is where we're going to start together. So let's read that at the very beginning of chapter 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you." Now that seems like a pretty simple start to that long story that I just tried to encapsulate, but really the rest of Abraham's life and all the details of his story and who he was are really just a continuation of his response to that simple command from God. Leave this and go to that. And we've actually talked about this a little bit recently and some of the implications, but I want to be abundantly clear. To leave this and go to that for Abraham was a monumental thing to do. And it's so important to understand how big this is. So I want to explain a little bit of what this simple command would have meant. God says, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family. Leave this and go to that. So leaving your native country at that time would have meant leaving any semblance of safety. We don't know a ton about Ur or its governmental structure or any of those things, but leaving your native country in a situation like this would have meant leaving any official protection or safety you might get from your homeland. Striking out on your own meant becoming a completely unprotected foreigner in potentially hostile lands. God told Abram, leave that safety of your native country. He also said, leave your relatives. And some of you are like, easy, right? Check. I've done that already. But leaving your relatives meant leaving any level of familiarity, comfort, or really support. It meant leaving support. It's one thing to give up the safety of like your homeland and your country, but it's next level to give up that feeling of being truly known and understood by the people around you. Now, you may not love all of your relatives, but certainly in these times, the relatives that you had were those that knew you, knew your story, knew your fears, knew your dreams, and they were the people that supported you in life. So God said, leave the support of your relatives, of your people. But even more than either of those things, the next was probably even bigger. To leave your father's family was probably the deepest sacrifice of them all. Because to leave your father's family meant to step out of the legacy that had been passed down for generations. We've talked before about how important family was in these cultures and how generation after generation would really carry the legacy that was handed down to them from the generation before. Leaving your father's family was truly a step out into the unknown without any of that legacy. Listen, both for yourself and for future generations. And God told Abram, leave the generations of legacy and honor and fame of your father's family. Last week, Pastor Phil started off this series by really diving into the cost of a no, right? We looked at Adam and Eve and the cost of the no that they told God in the Garden of Eden. But you also need to know this: giving God your yes is costly. There's no question about it. He may ask each of us to give up drastically different things, and he may not ask you to leave your family or leave your location or any of those things. But if you aren't prepared to give up what is familiar, what is safe, what is comfortable, what you think you deserve, what others say you should have, if you aren't prepared to give up even all of those things, if God asks you to, it means you're holding on to something a little bit tighter than you should. I mentioned earlier, we're in the season of Lent. Many of us know Lent as a time when we give something up, right? It's a season of intentional sacrifice and surrender as we prepare for Good Friday and Easter. We've talked before about how giving something up for Lent is not the goal in itself, but it's meant to be a chance to intentionally lay something down so that we can pick something else up. For Abraham, and certainly for each and every one of us, God will give us opportunities to pick something amazing up. But the reality is it requires us to lay something down first. So I want to ask you a challenging question. What would you lay down if you believed what you pick up would be better? What would you be willing to lay down in your life if you actually believed the thing that you're picking up would be better? All throughout the Bible, Abraham is mentioned and celebrated as a man of great faith, and rightfully so, but it was not because of his skill or his abilities or his resources or knowledge, even the opportunities. The Bible lifts up Abraham as great, as a man of great faith, because he gave God a yes. God told him, leave all this stuff behind and go to that, and if you do, I will bless you. And listen, Abraham believed God. He believed that God would do that. As a childless 75-year-old immigrant with no directions for where he was going, God simply said, if you do this, I will bless you. And Abraham believed him. He believed that the blessing God promised was worth whatever he had to lay down. So he said, here I am, God. You have my yes. What if you believed that the life God is offering you is actually better? What if you believed that salvation was actually better, that freedom was better, that purpose and calling was actually better than whatever you're holding on to? Maybe you're holding on to safety or comfort or familiarity or control. Maybe you're even holding on to fear or pain because that's just what you're used to. What if you let those things go, laid them down so you could pick up something so much better on the other side? Back to Abraham's story. If you're anything like me, the assumption when you think about somebody with as much kind of spiritual impact as Abraham is that this dude must have been at some sort of superhero level of faith, right? He couldn't have just been an average person. He must have been so inherently special that God was kind of, sitting up in heaven and he saw this guy kind of rise to the top and he's like, oh, that would be a good one. Let's go ahead and pick him. But if you read Genesis 12 through 25, really the story of Abraham's life, you're going to find some proof that Abraham is absolutely a spiritual hero and he's absolutely a spiritual knucklehead. I love the way the Encyclopedia Britannica sums up this picture of Abraham that we capture in Genesis. It says, Abraham is pictured with various characteristics. He's a righteous man with wholehearted commitment to God. That's good. He's a man of peace, compassionate and hospitable. He's a quick-acting warrior and an unscrupulous liar to save his own skin. I don't know if that really made the tombstone for Abraham. Father, husband, unscrupulous liar, something like that. But it's true because when you read his story, you'll find that to be the case. You're going to find a very honest picture of a guy who makes some really stupid decisions. The old saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing but expecting different results. Have you heard that before? By that definition, Abraham was also insane. Remember when I said they were bounced out of Egypt, like kicked out of the country? Well, like 5 chapters later, Abraham tries to pull the exact same stunt And he doesn't even change the wording of the lie that he tells. Now, the Bible doesn't say this, but I'm picturing God just going, dude, again? We just went through this, didn't we? Are you kidding me? Abraham gave God an amazing yes. And then he went on to make dumb decisions, get completely sidetracked, be a selfish liar. The Encyclopedia Britannica finishes the thought. It says, Abraham appears as both a man of great spiritual depth and strength and a person with common human weaknesses and needs. Listen, God does not need you to be perfect, but he does need you to be willing. God doesn't need perfection from you, but he does need willingness. Listen, if you are a person with common human weaknesses and needs, go ahead and raise your hand right now. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Listen, if your hand is up right now, that means you're also perfectly capable of having great spiritual depth and strength. And I might add, enormous impact as well. Maybe you have never given God a yes in your entire life. Maybe you've given God lots of yeses, but recently your history is littered with imperfection. But either way, I think too many of us assume that our imperfection means that we are no longer useful to God. No matter where you are on this journey, God is not looking for perfection, but he is looking for willingness. He's looking for somebody to say, here I am. When we look at Abraham's story, undoubtedly the apex of all of it comes in Genesis chapter 22. This is a story that we actually looked at in depth just a few weeks ago, and it's kind of the prove-it moment of this whole idea of Abraham's response to God. Abraham and Sarah at this point had been given this son Isaac at the age of 100 years old, and Isaac was the fulfillment to this promise to bless him with a child who would be the heir to the promise to become a great nation. In Genesis 22:1, it says, sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. God calls Abraham's name and he responds by saying, yes, here I am. The Hebrew language that Abraham is using is actually a compound word. The word he says is hineni. Hineni. I got a little cold right now, so it's nice and nasally. Hineni. Say that with me. Ready? Hineni. Right? That's what Abraham says, and it's two words put together. It's behold and me. So Abraham is saying, behold me, look at me, I'm here, see me, and it's a reciprocal notion that you see me because I can see you. You have my attention because you are giving me your attention. God calls to Abraham and he responds, Hineni, here I am. God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah, go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. So God tells Abraham, take your dearly loved son that I gave you as a fulfillment to this promise, the culmination of your willingness to leave safety and familiarity, leave all that behind. Take Isaac and sacrifice him as an offering. A few weeks ago, we talked through the details of this unbelievable situation. How Abraham chopped the wood for the fire himself. How he gathered up everything that they would need for this long journey. How he carried the knife that would be used and for 3 days walked with his son toward the place they needed to go. How together they climbed the mountain and Abraham built the altar and tied Isaac up and laid him on the altar. And in verse 10 it says Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied, here I am. Hineni. Behold me, you have my attention. Later in the Bible, it explains that even in this unthinkable moment, Abraham was actually ready to go through with this because he believed that God was able to bring Isaac back from the dead. He believed that the thing he was willing to lay down would be replaced by something even better, that God would come through even through this situation. Hineni, he said, here I am, God. I still trust you. I still believe in you. You still have my yes. But God had seen all he needed to see, so he stops Abraham from going through with it. He provides a ram as a substitute for the offering. And throughout the rest of the Bible, all the way up to and through the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, we see the fulfillment of God's original promise made to Abram. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. And here's the biggest promise of them all. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. Through God's divine plan and through Jesus' ultimate obedience, God fulfilled the promise to Abram so long ago to turn that line into a great people and to bless the entire earth. For Abraham, giving God his yes was costly, right? It cost him his safety and his comfort and all those things. But in a real sense, it cost him absolutely everything, because he was ready to even give up his dearly loved son, the fulfillment to this promise. So here's what I want you to hear today. Giving God a yes is costly. As we talked about last week, giving God a no is costly, but here's the difference. The yes is blessed by God. Isaiah 51:2. God says, Abraham was only one man when I called him, but when I blessed him, he became a great nation. See, it's the blessing of God that makes all the difference. When we say Hineni to God, when we say, God, here I am, you have my attention, you have my yes, we might not know what it's going to cost us, but we can know it will be blessed. We can trust and believe that there will be unbelievable blessing to that yes that we give. And whatever we might need to lay down and surrender, whatever it is we pick up is going to be so much better because it's blessed by God. The reality is God is calling your name. Just like he called Abraham, he is calling your name. No matter where you are on your faith journey, he's calling your name and waiting for you to respond. And some of us are doing a real good job of shutting out his voice altogether. Some of us have given God a no, or we've told God not yet. Some of us are given a partial yes. The truth is, God wants to use every single one of us. He wants to bless us with freedom and purpose and impact and calling and all of those things. But for many of us, he's still just waiting patiently, waiting for us to say, Hineni, here I am, God, you have my yes.